number of reasons. Number one, their economy is definitely more out of control than ours. We have the best banking system in the world, as it turns out, by a long shot. And, you know, I was amused because I was telling a class this in like 2007, and one of the students, oh God, what a homer. You know, he's Canadian and Canada has the best rah-rah. Why does he get up the Maple Leaf and fly it around, you know? But fortunately, it just took, you know, the US economy, the banking system completely collapsed. Oh, by the way, it's not a surprise. It completely collapses every 20 years. And it seriously collapses every 10 years, but it flat out collapses every 20 years. The US has the worst banking crisis you could probably imagine in history as a sort of consistent, in a consistent manner. Their banking system is a disaster. Ours isn't. You know, so that's one thing. We have more government intervention, you might say, than the US. So the US data is a little bit, it's more raw, if you will. The economy is less controlled, so things look a little bit more obvious in the US, which is why I use their data. I'll come back, I've got Canadian data, we'll come back to that as we need it. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is this. It's in your notes, but I'll just show it to you. Let me see here. Now let me show it just quickly. The one I'm really interested to begin with is this one. Or maybe I did. Let me see. No. Okay. I want to analyze this line here. Forget this stuff down here. We'll talk about that later. This is the total output of the society. And these, the thing is, you see, we have all those recessions. But the main thing to know is that just look at this. You see this series here, it tends to go up, but notice it rises and falls back and goes up. Like it doesn't fall back that much, that often. Notice it just falls a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. But there's an up and down kind of phenomenon. And this is true in virtually all economic data. So that's GDP, that's the output of a society. This is employment data. This is Canadian, US, but notice up and down, unemployment, up and down. Or another one would be this, prices, price data. Let's see this one here. Notice it goes, now it goes up and down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. The thing is, the modern analysis of business cycles is to try to find out what we call time series. Time series is any kind of like observations through time. And it could be anything. For example, it could be students at U of T over 40 years. How do students go up? Is there years when there's more students and less students? You know, that kind of thing. We could observe that. Prices of anything you want to talk about. Output of anything you want to talk about. Exports, imports, right? Do they have this behavior of going through periods of rising, reaching a peak, and going through periods of falling, reaching what we call a trough? So notice here, it's not a smooth thing. Prices here are going, look at this, up, 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 up. But basically, in general, they're all rising to this point, they fall to this point, they rise to this point, they fall to this point, they rise to this point, right? Or here's yet another one. This is imports, exports. You'll see another time series. Well, here's interest rates. Rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall. Right? Or, again, exports and imports. All sort of data. Here's housing. Fall, rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall, rise. Right? Ready? Notice the pattern. It's not like it's just noise. There's a pattern of when the prices or when the output or the exports or the imports, as I'll show you, when they tend to go up, they tend to go up, and then they reach some sort of a top point, and then they fall, and they tend to fall, and then they reach a bottom, and they tend to go up. So this is, say, these are business cycles. These are cycles in time series. Here's export and imports, just to show you, because all these things we'll be looking at. Yes. Funny, I don't have my own laptop yet. But anyway, it's a Canada. Okay, so let's go back to this particular. I'll show it to you on your notes because that's as good as anything. It's as simple for you. Right here. Let's examine this diagram. Now we're not doing a lot of detail or measurement stuff right now, or testable stuff right now. But the thing is to recognize what we're, basically what we are dealing with. Okay, now let's look at this. First of all, every economic series, and a lot of series that aren't, would you think that students going to U of T was an economic series? No, but it is a time series. Would you think that people going to movies was an economic time series? Oh, yes, it is. So we can figure out whether there's any cyclic behavior rising and falling as opposed to just, kind of random movement in number of people who goes to movies and less. I think, in fact, there's cycles in music, by the way, under certain conditions. Good music, bad music, etc. But essentially, this is the single most cited, we're going to talk a lot about it, time series for macroeconomic analysis. What it is it's called GDP, Gross Domestic Product. All that means is it's the output of a society. It's supposed to be representing the total sum of all the, licorice and tractors and movies and houses, all this stuff added up, first as a price and then corrected for price changes. So you don't have to worry about, we're just really interested in the output, not fluctuations in prices per se. And basically that says, this is the output of Canada. So for example, what's going on, next year Canadians might have bigger houses, more gasoline, bigger cars, more beer, that kind of thing. Adding all that up. Output. Real output. So you'll see though, in this period, now the actual definition, these are official business cycle recessions derived by the National Bureau of Economic Research. And what they actually do is they look at a whole bunch of different time series and figure out from them all that analysis what the actual recession is. But a lot of economists, even, I can see it in our textbook, which is incredible, but a lot of economists, but also certainly business types, politicians, etc., think that this is the barometer, the measure of business cycles. So notice, look here. These are the officially said official recession periods. Now the first thing we have to note is this. A recession is defined as a period of decline, of falling, right? To a point for at least 6 months. I should just say for at least 6 months. I'm going to clarify this a little bit more, but for at least 6 months. And a period of expansion, when the economy expands, or the time series expands, has to last for at least 6 months. I read P. Now this is in quarters, not yearly, quarters. First quarter, second quarter, third quarter. So now notice, the worst one in a fall in GDP that we have since World War II, the data since World War II, is right here. This last recession from 2008, 2009. Right? Notice, total output in the United States. Now visualize this. We're going to define this, we're going to talk about this. But visualize the United States in December 2007. There were so many cars produced, there were so many houses produced, there were so many books produced, there was so many all this. And it's all added up according to its relative values, right? So it's all added up. In 2007, they say they were producing something like $13 trillion worth of goods. Then they went into recession. That is, they produced less. The economy started to produce less. People lose their jobs, factories closed down, and they produced less. You can see in 2007 and 2008, 2009, the total output in the United States went down to approximately, let's say, it fell by about $500 million. Let's call this 13, or it's 13.25 probably. And this, let's call this 12.5. So imagine this room. Let's suppose we've got 100 people in this room. Together we're producing this stuff and we're sharing it, right? We're dividing it up. This determines what we get to live, how we get to live, right? What we produce is what we get to live on. So in 2007, this room was producing $13 trillion worth of goods. By 2009, we're producing $12.5 trillion worth of goods. In short, we're worse off, flat out worse off, by about 5%, something like that. But not only that, note, there's not going to be 100 of us anymore. There's probably like 105 of us because the population is growing, maybe 103, 104, right? The population is growing, but we are flat out worse off. What there is, the output is less, what there is to share is less. So, now notice, this is our recession in the time series. You can see, number one, there's the highest point. Everybody? And so notice it's got to be the highest point for 6 months on either side. You can see easily this is the highest point for 6 months on either side, right? That is called a peak. Whereas if I looked here, let me see somewhere back here. Not so obvious. I'll find it in other data. This is a little bit less obvious. Now, I'm going to show you something else. Okay, look here. Now then, here's unemployment data. Let's see. Now this is in terms of months, so this would be, for example, see right here? Now which is the peak, everybody? Is this little sucker here a peak? No. You'll notice this is not the highest point for 6 months on either side. The two lines are 12 months apart. This thing here is lower than this thing here, which is about 6 months earlier. So it's not likely to be a peak. And this trough is, but more than anything, the trough is not a trough. You can see that this peak here might be the highest point there, and the highest point there. So it might be the highest point in 6 months. But this trough is not the lowest point for 6 months. Everybody notice? This would be maybe July, and this point here in December is lower. So that is not a trough. Everybody? We can identify a trough and a peak. The economy can lurch forward, could actually fall for 4 months. But if it starts to rise again, it's not necessarily a trough. Okay? So a trough is identified in a time series as the lowest point for 6 months on either side. Clearly that's one, that's one, that's one. Which one? That's one, that's one, that's one. But which of these is a trough and which of these is a peak, or are they? Right? So there are some issues. But here we don't have that problem. So first thing to remember, a trough, right here, a peak is the highest point for 6 months on either side, right? Or it's the highest point for 12 months centered on that point. A trough is the lowest point for 12 months centered on that point. A recession must be 6 months long. So to identify a trough, the economy has to have fallen for 6 months as a steady diet. And that could have gone up a bit in one of those months, but as a steady diet has to fall. Similarly, a peak has to, an expansion has to expand for 6 months. So, peak and trough. Now, notice here. Here is, look, this is a peak, because this is basically this is probably December 79, and this point here, actually, in this data it's not clear that's a trough. because that may not be 6 months, full 6 months. But this thing is clearly a trough. There's a peak, continues to fall, there's the trough right there. Everybody? Now what's the significance of this? Again, back here. This period here, from here, the trough, to here is called an expansion. Because that's more than 6 months, and you can see that's the highest point for 6 months on that side. But even more so. This point from here to here is called a recession. That's a trough. This is another expansion. Notice here, in the GDP data, that is not a recession. You notice that? Because it isn't falling. It's a temporary lull, but it wouldn't be a recession in the GDP data. This is clearly a recession. This is clearly a recession. This is clearly a recession. This one maybe not so clear. This one probably so, etc. Okay, so notice, watch. Expansion to peak, contraction to trough, expansion to, let's say that is a peak, it isn't. Contraction to trough, let's say it's there, it isn't. Expansion to peak, contraction to trough. That determines, those gray lines would be the recessions, the period of fall. Okay, now, so again, let's go back to this thing. In the United States, they have like approximately, let's say, 300 million people. And in 2007, they had $13 trillion worth of output divided amongst 13 million people. 300 million people. 2 years later, they had $500 million less. Only $12.5 billion in total output divided between probably 310 million people. Okay, then the economy started to grow, but watch carefully. It starts to grow, but notice, this is going to have another definition. The recovery, notice, this is the period, I'll do it here. This is the period, this is the expansion. I don't have a new peak yet, right? But so the expansion will go on like this, wherever it goes to, we don't know yet. But the recovery is the period from the trough to the previous peak. So notice right there, now the economy has finally got to the point it was at the previous peak. That is called the recovery. Very important. You'll notice the economy peaked in 2007. It did not reach that peak again until 2011. So in fact, it was only in 2011 that the US economy got back to 13 trillion output. But by this point, there's 320 million people. So they're still not back to what we call per capita income they previously had. They're still not as well off per capita on average. Per capita means on average per person. So this is the whole deal. Again, for us right now, we just want to know the economic expansion is an increase in the time series for at least 6 months. A peak is the highest point for 6 months on either side. A contraction or a recession is a fall in the time series for at least 6 months. A trough is the lowest point for at least 6 months on either side. And a recovery is the period from the trough to the previous peak. So look what's happened with Obama. Well, the US economy has been expanding now for 4 years. Great. The US economy expanded. But even at that election in 2011, the economy still hadn't reached its peak before. So people are still not better off. There's more jobs. There's an increase in jobs. People are getting jobs. But as we'll see, there really wasn't even enough jobs to get everybody who was unemployed off a job, right? So the economy is growing, but people aren't better off. Hence, Obama's in deep trouble politically, right? That's the whole issue. So this is that. Now, where do I want to go next from here? I'll come back to that. Let's do this. Now notice here, this is unemployment rates in Canada and the United States. In 1980, the unemployment rate in Canada was about 7%. In 1981, 82 actually, it was 13%. In 1990, approximately, whatever this is, 89, it was 7%. In 1993, it was 12%. And eventually fell to here by about 2000 to 7, just below 7%. Then it went up a little bit to 8%. Then it fell to 6%. Then it rose and now it's falling again. Now the thing is, why does that happen? Why is there those fluctuations in unemployment? We're certainly going to see that unemployment is not a good measure. But why does that happen? Why does that happen? And what can governments do? Right? So we're going to be looking at this in particular. Okay, now, next thing is this. Look at this. I cannot stress to you enough how significant the issue of unemployment is. This is the cumulative job loss and every recession in the United States since 1945. You will see that all these recessions here, this is an exception, I don't know if you can guess which one it is. In all these recessions since 1945, as a simple measure, the number of people, the loss of jobs, continued getting greater and greater. So the total amount of lost jobs got bigger and bigger from somewhere between, in the worst recessions, notice here, these are the three worst ones, this one right here, for 16 months, and about 2 million people lost their jobs in total. After this point, it starts to go up like this. This was the maximum lost jobs in, notice that jobs fell, rose a bit, fell, rose a bit, and ultimately that's the low point right there. So that's 21 months. That's 1981, 82 or something. This one maybe, whatever, I don't know which one this is. This is 1991, surprisingly, I'm not sure it is. But anyway, this one had job losses for 20 months. And all the recessions, and all the fall in U.S. output, these periods of time when the economy goes in, starts falling, there's more unemployment, firms go bankrupt, profits fall, prices fall, etc., etc. In those periods, since World War II, in the worst ones, there was only a total of 2 million jobs lost. In the one in 2008, 2009, you can see there was over 8 million jobs lost. Over 8 million. This is the worst recession easily since the Great Depression. It's not as significant as the Great Depression, but it is a killer. And most of those jobs, a lot of those jobs, those people are still unemployed in the U.S. Because notice, with the U.S., every month there's new jobs. We'll talk more about this. We'll look at some data on jobs in a minute. But when you gain jobs in the U.S., you have to gain jobs to reduce the people who are already unemployed, to get them a job. You have to, first of all, get them a job, but you also, there's new people coming into the labor force. When you guys graduate, you are new people coming into the labor force. And it turns out in the United States, about 150,000, somewhere between 125 and 150,000, new people enter the labor force every month, right? Every month. So the students who graduated high school, university, whatever, other people coming to the labor force, immigrants, this and that. So there's 125, 150,000 people every month. You have to have 150,000 new jobs every month just to cut this back. Otherwise, all you're doing is hiring some people, but there's even more people coming into the labor force. That hasn't happened for Obama. On average, there hasn't been really more than about 175,000 jobs over the last 4 years a month. So every month you maybe get 25,000, 50,000 people reduced, but not many, right? So this is what we're interested in. We're interested in this issue. Let's take a break. But I'm going to do a little bit more background.